Cal Draven had never been one to settle into the quiet life, but the post-war world made it harder to resist. Earth had prospered under the Dominion's rule, or so the history book said. The Xerians, an ancient, technologically advanced empire, had once waged war against humanity, but after a long and bloody conflict, humanity emerged victorious, or so they believed. Kale, a decorated former soldier, had seen the horrors of war firsthand. But now, Earth was peaceful, and that peace came with a strange weight. It was the calm after the storm, the stillness that could break at any moment if anyone dared to ask the wrong questions. Kale had been home for years now, tucked away in a quiet suburb on Earth's sprawling outskirts. He had tried to bury his past, the bloodshed, the endless combat, the moment when the war had finally ended with the Dominion pulling back, surrendering in the face of humanity's unity. At least, that was how it was presented to him. In his heart, Kale always questioned that ending. Something felt off, like a missing piece of a puzzle he could never quite place. It was one of those quiet mornings when the disquiet first seeped into his life again. As Cal sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee, the news flickered on his holoscreen, broadcasting the same well-rehearsed message about the Dominion's peaceful retreat. The Xerians had left, their empire in disarray, and humanity had built a new world in the ashes of their former adversary. Another victory for the human race, the announcer chimed with a smile, as if the history of humanity had been written in neat, predictable lines. Cal's eyes narrowed as he gazed at the image of the Xerian leader, shrewd, calculating with an unnerving calmness. A peacekeeper, or so it seemed. The image flickered as a strange noise buzzed in his earpiece, barely noticeable over the broadcast. His pulse quickened. The anomaly was small, just a subtle distortion in the signal. But it caught Cal's attention. Only a few people knew how to manipulate signals like that, and one of them had been a friend from his old squad. His name was Lena, and they hadn't spoken in years. But Kale knew her well enough to recognize her encrypted code. She had always been the tech-savvy one. Lena had always been good at getting messages through unnoticed. Without a second thought, Kale quickly switched off the newsfeed and accessed the encrypted message. His heart thudded as he read it. "They lied, Kale. The war's not over. They erased us." The message was brief, but its implications were vast. Kale's thoughts raced. The Dominion had been defeated. At least, that was the official story. But Lena's words didn't make sense. Erased? What was she talking about? The government had released countless reports, documentaries, and books about the victory, the cost, the peace that followed. All of it was designed to soothe the collective memory of humanity. Yet, Lena's message hinted at something else, something dangerous. Cal's fingers trembled as he composed a quick response, but before he could send it, a loud knock interrupted his thoughts. His door. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone anymore. Panic bubbled in his chest as he slid out of his seat. Lena's warning echoed in his mind. They erased us. Taking a deep breath, Kale reached for the sidearm he kept hidden in the back of a kitchen drawer. He had learned long ago to always be prepared for the unexpected. He glanced at the holoscreen, but the image of the peaceful world still flickered back at him. A world that might be anything but peaceful. He opened the door, and before him stood a stranger, a tall figure in a dark, hooded cloak, their face hidden in shadow. "Cal Draven," the stranger said, their voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk." Cale's grip tightened on the doorframe as the stranger's words hung in the air. There was something unsettling about the calmness in the voice, too calculated, too precise. He shifted his weight, ready to act if necessary, his pulse quickening. "You've been looking for answers," the figure continued, stepping into the dim light just enough for Kale to catch a glimpse of their face. A woman with sharp features and eyes that gleamed with a kind of knowing that unsettled him. "How do you know who I am?" Kale's voice was low, steady, though his mind raced. The woman's lips twitched in the barest semblance of a smile. I know more about you than you realize. But for now, the question is, how much do you want to know about what they did? The door was still half open, and Cale could feel the weight of her presence pushing against him. He hesitated for a moment before stepping back, enough to let her inside, but not enough to appear welcoming. His instincts screamed that this conversation was about to turn into something far bigger than he could have anticipated. Once inside, the woman didn't sit. Instead, she paced the room, as if already knowing where everything was, where the walls held memories Cale himself had tried to bury. She spoke as though rehearsing a speech. Your world is built on lies, Cale. The Dominion didn't just conquer and leave. They never truly left. They rewrote everything. They altered your memories. My group, what's left of it, has been hunting the truth for years, and we found something that leads to you. Lena sent you, Cale interrupted, his mind grasping at straws. I don't understand. I thought She's gone. The woman cut in sharply, her gaze hardening. Lena was captured weeks ago, but before they got to her, she sent out that message. She knew what you'd do. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before the intensity returned. She knew you were already questioning everything. Cale felt his chest tighten. Lena, gone? She had been his closest friend during the war, the one who had kept him grounded when the fighting seemed endless. He couldn't imagine her captured. It didn't make sense. The Dominion's forces had been mostly absent from Earth's surface for years, relegated to the shadows, keeping up the pretense of peace. I thought they were gone, Cale muttered, more to himself than her. The woman nodded grimly. That's what they want you to think. They erased all evidence, all records, and built a new history. The war was never truly over. Humanity may have won, but the real battle has been fought in the shadows, hidden from you, from all of us. A chill ran down Cale's spine. He didn't know how to respond. It felt like everything he had believed about his life, about Earth, was slipping away. The Dominion's true goal, she continued, wasn't just control of Earth. They needed to make sure humanity could never become a threat again. They've been manipulating your history, your memories, even your emotions for decades. They know how dangerous you are, how dangerous we are. Cale's head spun. Dangerous? What did she mean? Humanity isn't just a small player in the galaxy, the woman said, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. You've got something the Dominion fears, something they've tried to suppress ever since the first human colony hit the stars. Cale's mind snapped back to his military days. He had heard rumors, old stories about the first colony, about strange artifacts and technology humanity had found when they ventured into deep space. But those stories were dismissed as myth, buried beneath the weight of the Dominion's so-called peace. Let me show you, she said, cutting through his thoughts. The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small metallic device covered in intricate markings. She handed it to him, her eyes locked on his, daring him to reject it. Cale took the device, his fingers brushing the cool surface. As he turned it over in his hands, a strange energy pulsed from it, like a heartbeat of its own. It was familiar, a memory, a feeling, something deep within him stirred. This is just the beginning, Cale, the woman said, her voice soft but insistent. The truth is out there, and we need you to find it. He glanced up at her, his eyes steely with resolve. Where do we start? The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. The past is never truly gone. Let's go find it. Cale's pulse raced as the woman, whose name he learned was Selene, led him through the quiet back streets of the city. The streets seemed empty, the kind of sterile calm that had always made Cale uneasy, like something just beneath the surface was about to crack. As they moved further from his home, he felt a growing sense of dread, not just for the danger of the unknown, but because, deep down, Cale knew that he was about to uncover something he could never ignore. Selene was a quiet force, moving with purpose, never looking over her shoulder. She spoke little, but when she did, her words held weight. like each sentence carried the weight of years spent unearthing truths most people wouldn't want to know. "We'll be meeting with an old friend of mine," she said, her tone clipped. "He's one of the last of the original resistance, someone who's been working to uncover what the Dominion did to Earth. His name is Dr. Hale. If anyone knows the truth about what really happened after the war, it's him." They arrived at a nondescript building on the edge of the city, nestled between high-rise structures that blocked the view of the stars. A forgotten corner of Earth, hidden in plain sight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and electronic hums. A labyrinth of files and old machines cluttered the space, creating a sense of organized chaos. In the far corner, an elderly man with wild silver hair and a gaunt face looked up from behind a pile of datapads. "Ah, Celine," Dr. Hale greeted, his voice rasping with years of disuse. "I didn't think I'd see you again. Thought they'd finally gotten to you." Celine nodded grimly, stepping into the room. "I'm harder to find than they think. This is Cal Draven. He's been asking questions." Dr. Hale studied Cal for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Asking the wrong ones, no doubt." "I need to know the truth about the war," Cal said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "The Dominion didn't just leave, did they?" Dr. Hale leaned back in his chair, a sigh escaping his lips. "No, the Dominion never left. They just changed their tactics. Humanity fought a war against them, a war that, if the truth were known, would make everything you know seem like a lie." He stood and moved to a nearby table, pulling out an ancient-looking device. "This," Dr. Hale said, "is a memory recorder. We used it during the war to document the true events. The Dominion used similar technology to suppress humanity's memories, making everyone believe the war ended with peace. But in reality, they took steps to rewrite history." He plugged the device into a nearby terminal, and the holographic display flickered to life, casting a bluish glow on the walls. A series of old video recordings began to play, showing images Cal had never seen before. Footage of humanity's resistance fighters on the front lines. Soldiers pushing back against the Dominion's forces, cities burning, people fighting for survival. The footage cut to a familiar face, Cal's own face, on a battlefield, the young, determined soldier he once was, rallying his comrades. It was the first time he'd seen himself from the outside, a younger version of himself in the thick of the war. But what unsettled him the most were the people in the background, familiar faces from his past. Some were dead. Others had simply vanished, erased from history. "This footage was recorded on Earth," Dr. Hale explained, his voice low. "Before the memory-wiping technology was activated, the Dominion didn't just want to defeat us. They wanted to erase us from the galaxy's history. They feared what humanity could become." Cal felt his throat tighten. The man he had once been, the soldier who had fought for freedom, was now a ghost, erased, lost in a version of history that didn't match the truth. The Dominion hadn't just wiped away memories, they had destroyed the very fabric of who he was. "What happened after this?" Cal asked, his voice a whisper. Dr. Hale's expression darkened. "After this battle, the Dominion began to implement their plan. They didn't want a war hero. They didn't want a rebellion. They wanted a compliant, peaceful humanity. So they altered our memories, broadcasted new versions of the war, and convinced us that the Dominion was gone, that peace had been achieved. What you've been living in for the past few years, it's a lie." Cal stood frozen, trying to process it all. His life, his entire world, had been carefully constructed by those who had already won. The memories, the stories, the history, it had all been rewritten, and humanity was none the wiser. "Why?" Cal finally managed to ask, the weight of the question nearly crushing him. "Because humanity has something the Dominion fears," Dr. Hale replied, his voice tinged with urgency. "A potential for greatness that they couldn't control, a potential to rise up and challenge them once more. And now that you've awakened to the truth, Kale, they'll be coming for you next. Kale's mind reeled as Dr. Hale's words sank in. The truth he had uncovered was like a wound torn open, revealing horrors he had never imagined. The Dominion hadn't just controlled Earth during the war, they had systematically erased the very essence of humanity's fight, manipulating memories and rewriting history to secure their dominion over Earth's future. It was a chilling revelation, one that left Kale feeling like a puppet in someone else's show. "We need to get out of here," Celine said abruptly, her voice sharp and urgent. "They'll be looking for us. We've already overstayed our welcome." Dr. Hale nodded, his expression grim. "I've already set up a hidden transport pod to take you to one of our safe houses. It's the only way to get you out before the Dominion's enforcers catch wind of this. We've been compromised." Kale barely registered the panic in Celine's voice as she ushered him toward the back of the room. His thoughts were still stuck on the footage, on the faces he had seen, friends lost, names erased from history. It felt like the world he had lived in, the one he thought was safe, had just crumbled away, revealing a terrifying truth. The Dominion was still out there, still controlling everything from the shadows. But they weren't just keeping the peace. They were actively watching, hunting for any trace of rebellion, any hint of humanity's hidden potential. "Where's Lena?" Kale asked, suddenly realizing the gravity of their situation. The woman who had sent the message, the one who had started him down this dark path, was she still alive? Celine hesitated, her eyes briefly closing. "We don't know," she replied softly. "She was captured. The Dominion's Silent Order has her." The Silent Order, the Dominion's elite enforcers, a terrifying force that could strike anywhere, erase anyone. Kale's chest tightened at the thought. Lena, someone he had trusted, was now in their hands. The weight of the mission had just become personal. Dr. Hale quickly activated a hidden console, and a small door in the wall slid open, revealing a sleek transport pod. "You'll have to leave now. I've already erased everything I can from the system here. If the Dominion tracks us, they'll know about this place in minutes." Kale nodded, his resolve hardening. He stepped into the pod, and Celine followed closely behind. The door closed with a soft hiss, and within moments they were airborne, gliding through the hidden undercity of Earth's sprawling metropolis. Kale looked out the window as they flew, the glowing cityscape fading into the darkness of the night. But his thoughts weren't on the city below. They were on Lena and on the fight that lay ahead. The resistance had made its move, and now, with the truth in their hands, they had a chance to strike back. But the Dominion wasn't going to let that happen easily. As they traveled further from the heart of the city, Celine broke the silence. "There's something else you need to know, Kale. The Dominion has been using the memory-wiping technology on more than just the population. They've been experimenting with it, perfecting it. What they've learned could be our greatest weapon, or our greatest downfall." Kale turned to her, confusion written across his face. "What do you mean? What could be worse than erasing memories?" Celine's expression grew darker. The Dominion isn't just erasing memories anymore. They've been implanting them, creating false identities, rewriting people's very thoughts and emotions. There's a new class of soldiers, Kale, soldiers with memories that aren't their own. They can't trust themselves, and neither can we. A chill ran down Kale's spine as he processed her words. Soldiers programmed to believe they were something else, to believe they had always been part of the Dominion's machine. It wasn't just a matter of erasing humanity's past anymore. It was about controlling who people became. Humanity's identity was under siege on a scale that Kale couldn't fully comprehend. "We need to stop them," Kale said, the weight of responsibility pressing on him. "We need to take down their memory-wiping network, destroy the technology they're using. If we can free people from their false realities, we might have a chance." Celine's eyes met his, a flicker of respect passing between them. "That's exactly what we're going to do, but we can't do it alone. There are others, former soldiers, scientists, civilians, all working to expose the Dominion's lies. They'll need you, Kale. We all will. The pod descended into a hidden underground facility, and as the door hissed open, Kale felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The fight for humanity's future was only beginning. The hidden facility was nothing like the sanitized, quiet suburban life Cal had left behind. It was a network of underground tunnels and darkened rooms, filled with the hum of machines and the chatter of people who had seen the worst the world could offer. His eyes adjusted to the dim light as they walked deeper into the heart of the Resistance's stronghold. This was where humanity's true fight for freedom was being waged, away from the eyes of the Dominion. Celine led Kel through a series of narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing softly. He couldn't help but notice the guarded expressions of those they passed. Some were soldiers, others were civilians who had clearly seen their share of the war, their faces hardened by loss and time. Despite the grim surroundings, there was an undercurrent of hope here, a belief that they were on the verge of something monumental. Cale couldn't shake the feeling that the events unfolding were about to change everything he had ever known. They finally reached a large open room where a group of individuals gathered around a series of holographic displays, engaged in heated discussion. Some of them looked up as Cale and Celine entered, their faces uncertain, expectant. The atmosphere was tense but focused. "This is where the real work begins," Celine said quietly, her voice carrying authority that Cale hadn't seen in her before. "We're assembling a coalition. People who have learned the truth, but it's going to take more than just knowing the facts. We need to strike at the heart of the Dominion's control, destroy their memory wiping system, and bring their hidden operations to light." One of the men at the table, a tall figure with short cropped hair and a scar running across his cheek, stood up as Cale approached. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He was dressed in the fatigues of a soldier, but there was a tiredness to him, a weariness that came from fighting a war without end. "You must be Cale," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm Commander Orin. Celine's told us a lot about you. You're a former soldier, right?" Cale nodded, shaking his hand. "That's right. But what I don't understand is why the Dominion's control is so important now. If they've been manipulating memories and erasing the past, why hasn't the public risen up? Why don't they see the truth?" Orin's expression darkened. "The public's memories are fractured, Cale. The Dominion isn't just erasing their past. They're making it so that people can't trust their own thoughts. Imagine waking up one day and not knowing who you are. Imagine everyone around you telling you that everything is fine, that the world is at peace. It's a kind of control so subtle, most people don't even realize it's happening." Celine added, her voice serious, "What the Dominion has done is worse than just changing history. They've altered the very way people think, shaping their realities so that the truth seems like a lie. This isn't just about memory wiping anymore. This is about creating a false reality for humanity, a reality that keeps them in line." Cal's stomach churned as the weight of their words hit him. It wasn't just manipulation, it was systemic, deeply ingrained in every aspect of human life. The Dominion wasn't just trying to control Earth, they were trying to dominate the very minds of humanity. "So how do we stop it?" Cale asked, determined to find a way. Orin leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "We've gathered a small group of experts, people who know the Dominion systems inside and out. There's a facility, a research lab hidden deep beneath the surface of the old war zone. It's where they've been perfecting their memory manipulation technology. If we can get in, destroy their central hub, and expose everything they've been doing, we can finally bring the truth to light." Cal's mind raced. The plan was dangerous, even suicidal. But it was the only way to break the Dominion's stranglehold on Earth. The idea of facing the Silent Order, of taking down the very people who had been manipulating humanity for so long, filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the war. "How do we get there?" he asked. Celine spoke up. "We have an inside contact, a former Dominion scientist who defected. He knows the facility better than anyone. We'll need him to help us navigate the security and sabotage their systems. And when we're in? Kale asked, his voice steady despite the nerves creeping up his spine. Then we fight, Oren said flatly. And we make sure the world knows the truth. No more lies, no more manipulation. Kale nodded. He didn't need to ask whether they would survive. The mission was bigger than any one of them. But he was in, and there was no turning back now. Let's make sure humanity remembers what it is, Kale said, his voice unwavering. Oren gave him a tight-lipped smile. That's the spirit. We'll need it. With that, the room fell into a hushed silence as plans began to take shape. They were preparing for a fight that would shake the foundations of everything the Dominion had built. It was a fight not just for freedom, but for the very soul of humanity. The days leading up to the mission passed in a blur of preparation. Kale had always known that war meant chaos, but this was something else, something colder, more calculated. They had no margin for error. Every decision was a step toward either saving humanity or condemning it to oblivion. Celine and Oren had gathered a team of specialists, each with a skill set that was as dangerous as it was vital. There were tech experts who could hack into Dominion systems, former soldiers who knew the art of guerrilla warfare, and scientists who had once worked for the Dominion itself, but now sought to tear down the empire they had helped build. But no matter how skilled they were, the mission was still a gamble. Kale spent most of his time training with the team, familiarizing himself with the latest weaponry and tactics. The Resistance had its own arsenal of cutting-edge technology, scavenged from Dominion remnants and repurposed for their cause. But the real battle, Kale knew, wouldn't be won through firepower alone. It would be the infiltration that mattered, the ability to move unseen and destroy from within. On the day of the operation, the team gathered in the makeshift briefing room, a small chamber deep within the underground facility. The air was thick with tension as Oren stood at the front, detailing the final steps of their plan. The facility is located in an old war zone, Oren began, his voice low but commanding. It's heavily guarded, and the Dominion has set up a wide range of traps to detect any unauthorized entry. The only way in is through a forgotten service tunnel used by the old war supply routes. It's been abandoned for decades, and that's why we're using it. But the catch is, once we're inside, we have to move quickly. The Dominion has a fail-safe system that will activate as soon as they detect a breach. If we're not out in time, the entire place will self-destruct. Kale felt a chill. This wasn't just a mission to take down the Dominion's memory manipulation technology. This was a mission to save Earth from being erased entirely. So what's our goal? Kale asked, his voice steady despite the sense of urgency in the air. Get to the central hub, Oren answered, pointing to a holographic map that shimmered in the center of the room. We destroy the servers, hack into their data vaults, and expose everything. All the lies, all the history they've hidden. If we're lucky, we can upload a message to every terminal on Earth. Humanity will finally know the truth. And if we're unlucky, Kale pressed. If we're unlucky, Celine said, her voice cutting through the tension, we won't make it out alive, but we'll have done what we could. The team dispersed, each person retreating to their stations to prepare for the journey ahead. Kale, however, found himself standing still, looking at the flickering map of the Dominion facility. There was something unnerving about it, something Kale couldn't put his finger on. This wasn't just about sabotage anymore. It was about confronting the very foundation of everything the Dominion had built. Every moment they spent there would be a step closer to unraveling the Empire's dark secrets. As the team boarded the transport pod that would carry them to their destination, Kale couldn't help but feel the weight of the mission settle in his chest. The pod was small, barely large enough to fit the team, but it was fast, built to get them in and out without leaving a trace. The silence was oppressive as the pod cut through the air, taking them farther and farther from the Resistance's safe haven, and toward the heart of the Dominion's secret operations. Outside the pod's reinforced windows, the world blurred, empty fields, forgotten cities, and the remnants of humanity's past. The once vibrant landscapes of Earth were now just scars left behind by the war. Cal's mind wandered to the faces he had seen in the footage, his own, younger and full of hope, and the faces of those who had fought alongside him, who had believed in a future of freedom. And then Lena. The thought of her, captured and held by the Dominion's silent order, gnawed at him. They couldn't fail, not just for humanity, but for the people they had lost along the way. We're almost there. Celine's voice brought him back to the present. The pod began its descent toward the service tunnel entrance, hidden deep in a ruined city far from the prying eyes of the Dominion's patrols. The countdown had begun. In less than an hour, they would either be inside the heart of the Dominion's fortress or dead in its shadow. "Stay sharp," Oren instructed, his voice tight with anticipation. "This is where it gets real." Cal nodded, checking his gear one last time. As the pod touched down, the door slid open with a hiss, and the team spilled out into the darkened ruins. The wind howled through the broken buildings, a mournful sound that felt like the last breath of a dying world. The mission was about to begin, and with it, the fate of humanity. The cold air hit Cal as he stepped out of the transport pod, the weight of his boots sinking into the crumbling earth beneath him. The ruined city stretched out before them, its skeletal structures casting long shadows in the moonlight. The area was eerily quiet, save for the howling wind that whipped through the jagged remains of buildings, silent witnesses to a forgotten time. It was a far cry from the clean, controlled environment Cal had once known. Here in this desolate landscape, the past and present were at war, and the remnants of humanity's struggle against the Dominion lay buried beneath the rubble. "Stay low, stay quiet," Oren's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the silence. "We're moving on foot from here. The tunnel entrance is about 2 clicks north, but the Dominion's patrols sweep this area every few hours. If we're spotted, we're dead. No second chances." Cal nodded, his pulse quickening as the team moved forward, staying close to the ruins for cover. His senses were on high alert, every footstep, every rustling of debris, amplifying his already heightened anxiety. There was a feeling in the air, something he couldn't place, that told him the Dominion was closer than they thought. As they advanced, Celine walked beside Cal, her eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. The faint glow of her wrist pad illuminated the path ahead, casting an eerie light over the decaying cityscape. "You okay?" she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. Cal forced a steady breath. "Yeah, just thinking about what's ahead." "You're not alone," she replied, her gaze locking with his for a brief moment. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in the heat of rebellion and shared struggle. "We all have our reasons for being here, but we're doing this together." Cal appreciated the reassurance, but it didn't quite silence the gnawing unease in his chest. The closer they got to the facility, the heavier the air seemed to grow. Every step felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation, one where there was no guarantee of survival. But the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. They had to take the fight to the heart of the Dominion, or else humanity would remain in chains forever. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the hidden entrance to the old supply tunnel. It was barely a crack in the earth, obscured by fallen debris and overgrown vegetation. Oren knelt, pulling away the debris to reveal a rusted metal hatch. He keyed in a sequence on the keypad beside it, and with a groan of protest, the hatch slid open. "Let's move," Oren said, his voice taut with urgency. The team descended into the tunnel, one by one, into the darkness below. The air inside the tunnel was thick with the smell of mold and decay, a stark contrast to the sterile environments Cal had been used to. Their footsteps echoed as they advanced, the sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. The further they went, the darker it became, the dim glow from their wristpads barely illuminating the path ahead. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the earth, Celine's voice broke the silence again. The facility is about a mile from here, but the closer we get, the tighter the security will be. We'll need to split up when we reach the entrance. Oren and I will take the main route, while you and the others secure the secondary access point. We'll meet at the central hub. Kale nodded, trying to steady his nerves. This was it. There was no turning back now. The Dominion's grip on humanity's memory and future was about to be broken, or at least, that was the hope. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing in some places, opening up in others. They passed through several old, forgotten chambers, remnants of a world that had once relied on this subterranean network to fuel its war efforts. Kale's thoughts lingered on the faces of those he had fought alongside during the war, wondering how many of them had been erased, how many had been turned into false memories, tools for the Dominion's grand design. "We're close," Oren's voice came over the comms. "Get ready." Kale's heart skipped a beat as the team approached the final stretch. They reached a large metal door, hidden in the depths of the tunnel system, its surface slick with years of neglect. Oren motioned for them to halt, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. "This is it," Celine whispered. "Once we're through this door, we're in the heart of the Dominion's operation. No more distractions, no more running. It's all or nothing." Cal's fingers tightened around the grip of his weapon, his breath shallow. The door in front of them was the final barrier between them and their mission. The countdown had already begun, ticking down toward a confrontation with the enemy that would decide the fate of humanity. The truth they sought was within reach, but so was the Dominion's wrath. With a deep breath, Kale nodded. "Let's finish this." And with that, Oren placed his hand on the door's access panel, and it slowly began to open. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing the vast, sterile expanse of the Dominion facility. Cold, blue light flickered overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows across the rows of machines that lined the walls. A faint hum of energy vibrated through the air, the only sound in the silence that enveloped them. Kale's breath caught in his throat as he stepped over the threshold. They were inside the heart of the Dominion's operation. "We need to move quickly," Oren whispered, his voice low but urgent. "We're on borrowed time. The security system here is top tier. Any delay and we risk triggering the alarm." Celine motioned for the team to spread out, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. The central hub was up ahead, but the path was far from clear. The place felt like a fortress, no windows, no easy escape routes, just a series of interconnected rooms filled with high-tech equipment that Kale could barely comprehend. Cal's mind raced. They had come this far, but there was no telling what lay ahead. The Dominion was ruthless, and if their security systems were even half as advanced as they had been led to believe, every second they spent in this facility was a second closer to their discovery. He glanced at Celine, who nodded and signaled for him to follow. She led the way, moving with the precision of someone who had infiltrated enemy lines too many times to count. They passed through a series of narrow corridors, avoiding security cameras and motion sensors with expert timing. Kale's heart pounded as they neared the central hub. This was the place where the Dominion's memory-wiping technology was housed, where the false histories of humanity had been written, erased, and rewritten. They rounded the final corner and came face to face with a massive door, reinforced with layers of armor plating. The door was a perfect barrier, one that would take a team of engineers hours to breach. But the team had something far better: knowledge. Oren stepped forward, his hand moving over the surface of the door's control panel. After a few tense moments, the door gave a soft click and slid open, revealing the heart of the Dominion's operation. The room inside was vast, filled with rows of servers, each humming with power. At the center of the room stood a massive mainframe, the neural core of the Dominion's memory manipulation technology. Kale could see the flickering images on the screens, the distorted faces of humans, people whose identities had been stolen, whose memories had been erased and rewritten. It was like a graveyard of souls, all of them trapped in false realities, unaware of the lies that had been implanted in their minds. "This is it," Celine said softly, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. "We shut this down, and the Dominion's hold on humanity is broken." But even as she spoke, Kale felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong. The air seemed to grow heavier, the hum of the machines louder. Then he heard it, the sound of footsteps, distant at first, but growing louder by the second. "They know we're here," Oren hissed. "We've been compromised." Suddenly, the room was flooded with light, blinding in its intensity. A voice crackled over the facility's PA system, cold and emotionless. "Unauthorized entry detected. All personnel report to the central hub. Activation of defense protocols is in progress." A siren blared, and the walls around them shifted as hidden turrets emerged from the ceiling, their targeting systems locking onto the team. Kale's instincts kicked in. He raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a figure stepped into the doorway. Tall, cloaked in black, and carrying the unmistakable aura of the Dominion's elite. The silent order. "Get to the mainframe," Orin shouted. "I'll cover you." Kale didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the central terminal, his pulse racing. Behind him, gunfire erupted as Orin and Celine fought to hold back the silent order's forces. The world seemed to slow down as Kale reached the mainframe. His fingers flew across the control panel, accessing the system that had enslaved humanity's memories for so long. The screen in front of him flickered as he bypassed the Dominion's security, and then, with a final keystroke, the mainframe exploded in a shower of sparks. The system collapsed and the monitors went dark. It was done, but there was no time to celebrate. The silent order was closing in, their footsteps echoing in the hallways. The room was filling with smoke, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning circuitry. Kale turned to find Celine and Orin fighting back to back, their faces grim but resolute. They had won, but at what cost? "We need to get out of here," Celine shouted over the chaos. Kale didn't need any further prompting. They had done what they came to do. The truth would now be known to the world. Humanity's memory was theirs to reclaim, and with it, their future. But the Dominion wasn't finished. Not yet, and neither was their fight. Together, they turned and ran, their escape a blur of gunfire and flashing lights. The resistance had struck a blow, but the war for humanity's freedom was far from over. And Kale knew one thing for certain: the forgotten struggle had just begun.